One of the toughest things that people have been asking a lot is, how can you tell if someone is driving distracted? It is not a lot of fun to piece this all together. So just as a warning, there's not going to be a magic tool that's just going to make all this data pop out for you.
All right, so a little bit about us. If you have not been familiar with our work before, we do like to team up on our DIFR Summit presentations. I'm Sarah Edwards, like Phil said. I do the Mac class here. I also am a mobile forensics engineer at Parsons Corporation, so I get to do a lot of mobile stuff. So it's a lot of Android as well as iOS, so I don't just do the iOS side. I don't like to put that out there, but I do have to touch an Android every once in a while. And I'm just a general Mac nerd, and that's what I do.
And I'm Heather. And for once, Sarah's actually taller than me in this graphic. That's the best she's going to get. But I have the sweet sweater vest, which is so special. I am the Senior Director of Digital Intelligence at Celebrate. I do Android and iOS. In this presentation, because I'm with her, I drew the Android straw. And yeah, also Mobile Obsessed 585 is my class with Lee Crugnelli, so it's fun stuff.
All right, so just a little bit about the setup. So of course I did the iOS side. I forced Heather to do the Android side. So the vehicles that I use are my personal cars, my phones. So I have an Audi S3. If you're in the DC area, you'll know exactly which car it is because it'll probably cut you off, and I apologize in advance for that. And you can definitely tell who it is by the plate. I'm not going to say the plate because it's being recorded, but you'll be able to figure it out very quickly. As far as the iPhone, I use my personal iPhone. It is a jailbroken phone. It's running iOS 12.1.1, so a lot of the artifacts are very specific to that.
If you really want to know the plate, you can read the back of her shoes. It's a clue for you.
It is on the back of my shoes right now.
So I'm not going to lie, I use CarPlay. So Android Auto was kind of a shock to my system. I used my car, which is the GMC Denali, so I will drive over you, not around you. And
you can't catch me, I'm too fast.
And I got lucky enough that I got a really horrible Nissan Sentra rental car, which is terrifying, but who cares if it's your test device? So I plugged all of these in, connected through Bluetooth, said, yes, please sync everything, and it was kind of glorious what I got there. I did focus on 2 different Androids. So in all fairness, the rooted one I got the most data from, which should make sense to you. So full physical was my best bet. I do need to dive a little bit more into my Samsung J7 Prime. So it does have a lot of data. Wait for a blog on that. I just didn't have enough time to do both for all of the Android stuff.
All right, so let's start with CarPlay, which is the best one. I think we both agree on that, right? Yeah. So a little bit about the interface. If you've not used CarPlay before, you can either hook up your phone wirelessly or connect it via like a lightning cable or USB cable. My particular car only does the through the cable connection for CarPlay. So I have not tested the wireless side. If you want to buy me a brand new car to test that, I'd be happy to take a new car. So if anybody's up for that, happy to do that testing for you. So this is the main interface. I plug my phone in. This is what's going to be presented on my screen. So it has some of the major apps that you would expect for car interaction. But the key here is that it doesn't have every app on the phone. So there are certain apps that I can use with CarPlay and plenty of apps that I cannot use with CarPlay. And that's going to be kind of a distinction later on when we talk about some of the correlation of whether you're distracted driving or things like that a little bit later on. So there are only certain applications that you're allowed to use. And there are some third-party ones. I have a WhatsApp here, but if I flip the screen, you'll see a few other ones like Google, Google Maps, Waze, all that good stuff as well. So as far as your basic configuration, so a lot of the artifacts that are the juicy stuff is only available with a jailbroken device or your gray key images, your Celebrate, what's it called? Celebrate? Premium. I know they have a new fancy name for it now. So some of the artifacts that you can only acquire with an iTunes backup, and this is going to be most of the configuration type stuff. So we have com.Apple CarPlay.plist. It's nicely named. You can find it pretty easily just doing a keyword search for it. This is keeping track of which cars was this device actually attached to. So I have an example here. It's got 3 different cars. You see my Audi, there's a VW in there, as well as a Honda as well. So now each one of these has a GUID associated with it, and we can use that later on to kind of correlate which car is doing what for this particular device. A couple other things. We have different icon screens for each one. So we have that GUID in there before, so like if I wanted to see what it was on Honda versus my VW, things like that. I might have different icon configurations. So each one of these You'll have a few of them in there if you've paired it up with a few different cars. But it's keeping track of which icons do I want on which screen. So maybe I use certain applications a little bit more than others. I might want to have that on the first screen. So it's keeping track of those by the bundle ID for that particular app. Now, getting into some of the more juicy things. So this is where we get into that jailbroken access. Most of the good details associated with these artifacts, you have to have that physical access to the device to correlate all this stuff. Now, all the screenshots for CarPlay, I am using my Apollo tool to actually do a lot of the correlation. So a little bit about Apollo. Basically takes a bunch of the different databases on iOS, primarily on iOS right now, runs a query through them, and dumps the information to another database in this case. So it helps me correlate across multiple databases what's going on with a particular device. Now, for this one, I just want to show the different connections. So I have to plug in my phone to my car, so I want to have plug-in events. So those are coming from the knowledgeC database. And I also get from the knowledgeC database whether it's connected to CarPlay or not. So I can plug it in maybe just to charge it, but I may or may not have CarPlay activated on the device. So I filtered it down here, and you can see that I plug it in, open up CarPlay, it's doing its thing, and I unplug it, plug it back in, unplug it, plug it back in. Sometimes CarPlay doesn't work exactly the way you want it, so you have to kind of fiddle with the connection there. And you can actually see that in the knowledgeC logs.
For Android, I'm a firm believer on before reinventing what's already been done, start with that. So I read a lot of Josh Hickman's stuff and talked to him a little bit back and forth. And he focused on in-dash a lot. So I tried to focus strictly on device. So instead of using the dash with Android Auto, which in all fairness, half the time I couldn't even get it to show up. So I was like, forget it. I'm on my device. So that's what you see there. The interface is not as fancy as CarPlay, which I was used to. I also started looking through all of the files. So where did Josh find his stuff, and could I replicate it? And what I immediately found is it depends on the manufacturer of the Android, it depends on the OS of the Android, it depends on your level of access, and it's a giant nightmare. So Android is not as organized as an iPhone, is the first thing I found. So you can see there, that bottom one where it says 85 degrees. This is going to pop up again in my slides, but I want you to remember that. On Android Auto, it remembers the temperature where you plugged in that device. So I was actually driving along and I was wondering, I'm like, why isn't it showing us our current weather? It remembers where you plugged it in. So if you needed to say someone was at a scene when something occurred, where did they start? Maybe they fled a place, but they plugged their phone in before they left. This is going to be stored in a file called Cloud Cards, which is coming up. Some of the other files that are interesting here. On the right, that's my settings. And I wanted to keep the auto reply, but I had to add in Hank, so I have something to search for, because I need tidbits to help me get through this Android. So you can see what's supposed to happen if I'm not distracted is I'm driving right now, Hank. That's the message that anyone that texted me would get. As far as preferences, again, they're sprinkled everywhere. Everything from first install and last use dates, we can see some of those are trusted in the preferences XML, which I'm going to show you. I used Bluetooth primarily. I did connect initially through USB to do the setup just to look at it, but then I did strictly Bluetooth since Sarah was doing connected. So we just had some differences here. Last usage date is going to help us with the distracted driving. And then the common user settings. This is one thing that can be a little bit confusing. So I told my car to always remember it. So if you look at the last date for that, it's the last time I told my car to remember it. So it was really after I first set it up, but not when it was last used. But here you can see that I have my Bluetooth address for my Denali that is shown there, and that was the first car I paired with. Something that we weren't sure on is where does it track just the last one used, or does it track every single device that you've connected to? And what I found was weird is when I went into the Android in the settings, it didn't show my cars. But of course, the device is storing it somewhere. So now we have the artifact pollution of Android. It is everywhere. I'm sure there are hundreds of other files that have this stuff that I just didn't find yet. So what I'm going to break down here, data usage, syncing artifacts that I found that were unique and a little bit strange, but it makes sense, and then Bluetooth and USB connections. So to start, the very first thing, were you connected or not? So you can see the very first time I ran Android Auto and the last time it started monitoring me So we have 2 date timestamps here. And it also, you can associate it to my local time or just keep it in UTC, whatever you want to do. Now, for the permissions, I said yes to everything, which I usually do when I'm doing testing. I want everything to be talking back and forth. So I said yes to contacts, SMS, even on the rental car, which you should never do if it's your real phone. I assume all of you know that. But what I found interesting here is this peoplelog.db. And you'll notice if we go actually back a slide, I think I can go back. Most of these files are in the gearhead for Android Auto. So just remember, gearhead is Android Auto itself. But some of these others are just polluted everywhere. So this peoplelog, what I found is when I connected to a new car, it needed to do a fresh sync that took longer because it didn't know who my contacts were. But if you look at, like up here, it says it already knows. It's like, okay, nothing is new, so data's still fresh. It will keep looking to see if you've added a contact. Now, if I do add a contact, how did I add it? Android Auto cannot do all that much for you. The best is when Google, I say, okay, Google, and she's like, ask what I can do for you. I'm like, okay, Google, what can you do? And she's like, I can call someone. I can get you directions. And I was like, and that's it. I was like, and back to CarPlay I go. But there are things that she does that you don't even realize. So she is syncing contacts. If I did add a contact and you saw that a new contact was synced, how the heck did I do that? I clearly was probably distracted and driving, or someone was doing it for me on my device. So if you look closely at this file, you can definitely break down what was going on in different cars I was connected to and then correlate that to the different cars. So the plugging in is obviously tracked in a file called Power Manager. And then there's also the search index database because it needs to know what can it look up for you. So here we can see in the search index, you should see my Denali and the Nissan Sentra. Now, I honestly thought I could not find the Sentra because I was searching for Nissan, which drove me crazy until like the final minutes where I was like, oh, it's called my Sentra. So this file actually saved me. So this is a good place to start before you start digging in all your crazy keyword searching on the device. Now, something that Josh mentioned in his paper, he was not able to test multiple cars. So this is something that was unique. It is tracking every single car you connect to through Bluetooth. So here we can see in this btconfig XML file, on the left we have the Bluetooth address for my Sentra, which was my rental car, and on the right we have it for the Denali with date timestamps on when I was actually connected. And then where I was when I connected is in that cloud cards file. So that cloud cards tracks the weather as soon as you got into your car, it remembered your Bluetooth, Android Auto connected, and it is permanently there. So it's a good way for you to footprint and say this is where the user was. And it's just hidden in a blob file in the database.
All right, so let's get down to looking at some of the apps. So one of the apps that you're probably going to interact with most is the Messages application. So I use it a lot. I don't actually use the phone part, and I don't call anybody anyway. It's a data device, not a phone calling device. So I use the Messages application a lot. So I'm either dictating messages through Siri, or Siri is reading me messages that are being sent to my device. So kind of the whole hands-free thing is the whole dictation and reading of these different messages. So first thing I want to look at to kind of correlate this, and again, this is my Apollo output, is looking at the knowledgeC database for evidence of Siri usage. So Siri usage does not necessarily mean it's only through CarPlay. I can use it on the device itself, but it's the first start to seeing that kind of evidence. So for this one, I'm just looking at the this app name called com Apple Siri UI begin and end. So I know exactly how long Siri was being used for. Now, she could be reading me things, I could be dictating things. We don't exactly know the actual usage of that just yet, but it's a good first start. Now, if I start overlaying more data on top of that, this is where we get to start seeing some of the CarPlay artifacts. So right at the top there, I have the CarPlay connected. We saw that in a previous screenshot. But now I start seeing things like what audio is being used. So is it using the microphone? Maybe I'm dictating something. Or is it using the speaker and it's dictating or telling me a message that I just received? So we can start seeing the audio inputs and outputs for that. A few other things I have highlighted here are the bundle IDs, the different applications in use. So I'm listening to Apple Music. I'm listening to the Apple Music at this point. So when I'm dictating messages or she's reading them back to me, it's going to show that's flipping back and forth between the messages application, com Apple mobile SMS versus com Apple Music. So I'm listening to music back and forth between these different messages. So you will see that being changed here. Now highlighted in red, some of the longer highlighted lines there, this is showing me that I'm sending a message. So we're looking at the InteractionC information here. This is going to give you a little bit more context. If I went further and actually opened this one up, it's storing a plist file showing me what the message is, who I'm actually contacting, and all the contact information associated with that message sent. So I can get more context here, you just don't see it in the screenshot. So a few other things in here. You just see the different interactions, you see the messages, so I am parsing out some of the actual SMS messages from the sms.db. But once you start overlaying things across multiple databases, this is where the context really helps. So it's good to not just focus on a single database. It's fine to look at that, but just know that correlation is going to be pretty key when you're looking at a lot of these artifacts. You can't just look at the SMS database and say, oh, that one was dictated through CarPlay. There is no flag, as far as I know, that associates a specific message being dictated through Siri. So you have to do the correlation to really figure out, were they doing this through CarPlay or were they doing it through the actual messages application on device, you know, kind of distracted driving.
And the Android's no different. The SMS database, which you can see here, sms.db, there is no flag saying if it was through me texting it, through me using voice to text, or me using OK Google to do this for me. But it's a good place to start. So if you have a time frame in interest, you can obviously go out to your messages because, like Sarah was saying, most people will text while driving. That's obviously known. How they did it is where you're going to have to piece all of it together. Was Android Auto in use? Was it plugged in? If you're plugged in or using Bluetooth, it doesn't mean you're hands-free. I had to trick Android Auto into not exiting because every time I tried to go into a different app, it wants to exit. And I was like, no, I want you to run so I can be distracted driver. So I would have to go into my minimized apps and then sneak into another one. So I am really distracted. The good news is I wasn't the one necessarily doing this. I would be lying if I said I didn't do it a few times. And I'm like, I don't want to crash. This is terrible. So I would have someone else driving while I was pretending to be distracted. But this is where it's hard. So you can see where I am very frustrated. And the stupid assistant can't do much. So I'm texting while driving. Clearly, in a case you work, no one's going to write that. I assume not. But this is how I do my testing. So you can see I'm actually doing distracted driving. And then I'm doing things hands-free. So I'm actually using this. And then I left Android Auto to text this, distracted driving now. You can finally see in here, I think, where it says Hank. Like, I'm driving right now. Hank, sorry, I hit you with the laser while you're drawing. But you can see that that message was sent out to, and this is all from the wall file. And then, did you read this while it says hold driving? Because things aren't going well. I am talking to myself at this point while driving, and I shouldn't have been. So I was like, I should just calm down and stop this. But you can see it's all there. And like Sarah was saying, you will see where I then leave and I go into WhatsApp. So the final thing I did here was I actually asked the device to send Hank a message through WhatsApp. So it's all over the place. You need to find a starting point that makes sense to you and use that as your anchor and then just spread from there. So really a timeline in any of the tools will probably be the most helpful, but the tools aren't going to timeline all these artifacts they're not parsing. So it's going to be more manual on your part from that point.
All right, so getting back to some of the application usage. So I wanted to show kind of some examples of doing application usage through the CarPlay application itself or through the CarPlay interface itself versus me on the phone, distracted driving, maybe sending a message or something like that. So I want to show the differences between that. So a couple of different examples up here, and I filtered this down because I need you to look at other databases. So I'm basically filtering it down to the knowledgeC database and overlaying that with the cache encrypted C database. So the ones that are labeled motion, this is cache encrypted C. This is keeping track of certain things like, are you on a bike? Are you in a car? Are you moving? Are you not moving? Things like that. So that is kind of a good indicator, and it's actually fairly accurate from the research that I've done to say, is this person actually in the car or not? And you don't have to be plugged in. It has nothing to do with being plugged in. It's the motion of the device itself. It just knows that you are in a car and if you are moving or not. So it is pretty darn accurate. So taking a look at the motion there, I have some items that are highlighted at the end of the screenshot. Is in vehicle, is moving or not. So the first one, I'm in the vehicle, I am moving. The last one is in the vehicle but not moving. So maybe I'm stopped at a light or something like that. Now the two different applications that I'm using here, we got Apple Podcast, which is a CarPlay application. I want to listen to some podcasts. And then org.whispersystems.signal. So this is the Signal application. Signal does not have CarPlay support. So I have two different applications that I want to take a look at. Now if I start overlaying more data, I can see if I'm actually going to be distracted or not while using the Signal application. So a lot of the location stuff is also being tracked. Very, very granular location. Awesome, awesome forensics data. So this one is keeping track of the speed that I'm going. So the items that are highlighted in red here is keeping track of my speed in meters per second. So I'm not going very fast, and you can see that in that association there. But I'm basically slowing down. I use Apple Podcast, so maybe I'm switching from Apple Music to podcast. I want to listen to something different. And my meters per second in the middle there is 0. So I'm stopped. So if you actually look at that location, you got the coordinates there. If you want to plug those into whatever map application you like, you're going to see that I'm stopped at an intersection. So you can say I'm probably stopped at a stoplight at this particular time. So at the stoplight, I open up the Signal application. So I take out my device, I get through the CarPlay interface, but I want to check my Signal messages. So we can see that interaction there. Now if the meters per second before or after that is, I don't know what a crazy distance in meters per second is, but say 50 or something, yeah, I'm probably using the application while I'm driving, or somebody in the car is using the application. You don't necessarily know if it's the driver or the passenger. That's something that we're not going to see within the data. So using Signal here, I'm at a stoplight, it's 0 meters per second, and it is pretty darn accurate for that particular speed. Now, the third one that I have listed here, right at the bottom, so Apple Core Off UI. So this one, if you've ever used Signal before, you can have it associated with Face ID. So I actually have to look at my phone and see, yep, it sees my face, it'll open up, and I can see all my Signal messages in there. So you'll find different applications have different Face ID authentication, if you will.
So now you're driving distracted?
So yes, I'm driving distracted because I'm literally have to look at my phone to open up the Signal application. But you can see with the location that my speed is 0, so theoretically I'm stopped at this particular moment in time.
So I had to include this one. Sarah and I were torn on, do we want to show maps or not? But she kept listening and tracking what I was saying, so I get very frustrated during my testing and talk back. And you can see that in yellow down there, Siri is faster than you. So she wasn't responding to me. I'm like, okay, Google, do this. And I'm so used to in CarPlay where I say, take me to the DIFR summit. And she said, headed to the DIFR summit. I'm like, thank you, Siri. Mm-hmm. So I'm asking, I'm like, are we actually going anywhere? No response. And I'm like, and then she's tracking me saying, are we on our way to Celebrate in Tyson's Corner? And it should have been Celebrate. And then she doesn't respond. So I'm like, Siri's so much faster. Because I just see this spinning nothing of the voice, which it's crazy. If you heard even what Alexa captures on me when I'm like talking back to it and yelling, and usually I'm like, thank you, and I'll apologize. My son's like, shut up. I'm like, okay, or that. It's very helpful. But it is all tracked. So there are these session files that you can just go into, and you can see every single thing, just like the user is typing something into Google. It's all tracked there, which was pretty useful and helpful. Now, where this becomes a giant nightmare, and when Sarah and I first put these slides together and then she saw it, she's like, oh my gosh, this slide's out of control. Mm-hmm. That is how it's going to feel in your examination. So you will see that data is everywhere, and you need to put it together to say, was I distracted or not? So we're back to that SMS message. So if 7:16 at around that time is of interest to you, this is where you can see where I admit, because I put it in the text message, which again, no one probably would do this, that I set it up while distracted driving. But then I actually say I'm now hands-free. I did make a call, and I did that through Google Voice, but it's hard for you to know that if you don't go back and find those files where I say call Hank. I also, on the left here, so if we're starting, this is a protobuf file, these binary PB, and you can parse them, but parsing it didn't make it look all that much better, so I just left it in hex. So I asked Google to text Hank, And she asked which one. There's two of them, Hank Fresh and Hank Freshman. And I said, Hank Freshman. But then I tell her, I want you to text Hank Freshman through WhatsApp. So she tracks all of this in the write-ahead log. So she has the message before it even hit my WhatsApp database. So if you're dealing with a WhatsApp device that's encrypted, Google is going to keep it in the write-ahead log for the SMS, the MMS SMS.db, as a second copy. So you could also find it there. But then what's interesting, as I'm timelining in my tool, I see that screenshot right there. So apparently WhatsApp crashed at some point, and when it crashed, all smartphones take snapshots of what's going on the device, and I was able to recover that. So clearly, when that occurred, if that WhatsApp message still went through, or if I clicked OK, if you can find that interaction, that would possibly help you. When we look at created date timestamps of these files and these pictures, this is where you're like, I don't know really what is happening. It is going to be very difficult for you to say 100% that I was not doing this distracted, because I was connected to Bluetooth. You do see Google Voice interaction. It would be easier if I told you someone was in the car with me who was actually doing the typing and the talking, but you don't really know that necessarily when it's a he said, she said type accident or a fatality or something you're working. So there's not an easy way right now for you to say, oh, this is amazing and it's so easy and here are all the answers. That's the bad news. But these protobuf files are really, really helpful. You can also carve out all of the Google Voice files and listen to them, and that's something that is in Josh's paper that we'll highlight for you at the end. So I didn't bother doing that because he's already done a brilliant job with it. So it's both versions of the Android way that Google search box is storing that for you.
All right, so like Heather mentioned, we do want to give a special shout out to Josh Hickman. He's written a bunch of great blog articles on both CarPlay as well as Android Auto. And we specifically did a lot of artifacts in this that weren't presented in those to, not to overtake what Josh has already put out there. So we really recommend, if you're interested in this stuff, to absolutely take a look at his blog articles. They're great, they're lengthy, they got a lot of screenshots. There is some great information in there, stuff that we can't cover in a short presentation like this, but there are fantastic artifacts out there. So we give you a couple links here, but just do a search for the binary HIC and look for either CarPlay or Android Auto.
As far as what's next, so obviously lots more research. I want to dig into the J7 device I didn't have time for. When I do that, I will definitely write blog about it, and maybe Android modules for Apollo.
Yeah, it's not just an Apple thing, it's just a SQLite thing. So if you have SQLite databases, you want to write modules, I'm happy to accept them into the code repository. It's mostly just my project right now, but it's available to everybody to hopefully add some stuff in there. So it's just a bunch of great SQL queries. I say great because I wrote them, but there's a bunch of queries that can be very, very useful in a variety of different investigations. So certainly take a look at that if you get a chance, and very happy to see contributions to it. If you like this, certainly take a look at some of our other research that we put out there. I know Heather and I, we both have our own blogs. We'd like to throw some stuff out there. We like to present in other places. So take a look at our blogs. Hers is Smart Forensics, mine's Mac Forensics, 4N6, get it? Yeah. Certainly take a look at our classes too. I know a lot of students are going to be here, or previous students, so we do like to talk about this. Sometimes in our classes we can't get super in-depth into a lot of our data, but we really do like to put our information out there, and we certainly do a lot of webcasts as well through a variety of different means.
The best way to reach us that we both prefer is through Twitter or in the hallway here or something. I know we're running tight on time for lunch, so we may keep questions somewhat to a minimum if there's a lot, but we're around, you can find us.
We're here all week. All right. Well, thank you. I hope everybody has a great lunch. I don't know if we're gonna have Rob speak. Go.